It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 51, recorded on this day, the 8th of November 2023. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm excellent.
And there you go. How are things in Hong Kong today?
Well, things have gotten a little bit better. There's just a few more tourists around, the Koreans and the mainlanders here. So there's just a little bit more air of an optimism around the place. A long way to go to get back to what we were, but we're heading in the right direction.
Excellent work, excellent work. Well, we're going to kick things off in Australia here. We have been following this story very closely. Of course, The Australian, where I work, they were the very first to this story. In particular, John Ferguson, good mate and colleague of mine, broke this particular story. And now Erin Patterson, 49, has been charged with 3 counts of murder and 5 of attempted murder after 4 people fell ill during a lunch at her home in Leongatha in July. So she's been charged, Jack. There was a request from the police to analyse computer equipment seized from her home and in other places, as I understand it. They have dogs, Jack. They have sniffer dogs which can pick up things like thumb drives and things like that might be buried underground.
Oh, dear.
I did not know that. That's a new one for me. But yes, they've requested, I think, 6 months to analyse computer equipment found on or around Patterson's property. And the magistrate, and this was heard in Morwell, I believe, in court.
Yeah, it was heard in Morwell.
Was a little bit astonished that they'd required 6 months, but he let that go through to the keeper. And she has been remanded in custody. There may well be a bail hearing later on, but at the moment she is cooling her heels in remand.
You would think if the delay is going to be quite that long, getting a bail hearing up wouldn't be all that difficult. But
well, given the fact that she's showing no indication of flight, it might be that she does get bail at some particular point. But the chances are extremely serious.
It looks like it's going to be that they're going to run a kind of a propensity, or what we used to call a similar fact evidence approach to this, with the large number of similar charges.
Yes, of course, her ex-husband, she's been charged with 4 counts of attempted murder in relation to him, and one of those, I suspect, is the lunch in July, where he pulled out, I think, with about 24 hours' notice. And then there were other attempts. He was hospitalised on one occasion with a very serious illness that no one could ever really put their fingers on, and made a recovery, but spent a hell of a long time in ICU. I just want you to put your lawyer's hat on, Jack, well, you just did before, but this will be a very difficult prosecution, I imagine.
Yeah. Anybody who thinks this is going to be a slam dunk, you don't know enough. This is going to be tough.
It's going to be tough. What I suspect has occurred, and I can tell our listeners that the locals, for whatever reason, are remaining fairly silent. They're not speaking to media. It may well be that the police have said, look, just let us get on with their jobs and don't speak to media. It'll make things worse. I don't know about that. But yes, I'm hearing that people are reluctant to speak to the media at the moment. But I suspect that the charges followed the release of a toxicology report. Again, we haven't heard that, but I suspect that's where it's come from. And this will be, well, it's global news, isn't it? It's news all over the world now. This is an astonishing story. I remember when it first broke, thinking this is going to be a big story, but I don't think I quite anticipated just how big it's going to be. The trial itself will be global news.
It will be, yeah. It's from a newspaper editor's point of view, it's a great story.
It's got a number of elements, yes. I remember speaking with John Ferguson very at around the time the story, or he broke the story, and we both agreed that it was going to be a very big story.
There will be people already thinking, am I going to get a book out of this?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. There will be books written. They'll be, given the propensity for true crime and so forth, there's going to be a hell of a lot of those people descend on Gippsland as well and follow the proceedings. I suspect the proceedings will be in Melbourne in the Supreme Court.
Helen Garner will be looking for a seat in the gallery.
Well, look, you're a podcaster yourself, Jack, but I don't know that you fully understand the extent of true crime podcasting. So I'm going to suggest there'll be at least 20 podcasts devoted to it at some point or another.
Yeah.
It's just, yes, it's a huge story. We'll continue to keep you updated on it at this stage.
I don't want people to think I'm critical of Helen Garner. Her version, I suppose, I'm not sure whether you'd call it true crime reporting, but her version of the coverage of trials and stuff has been very, very good.
Look, it's an industry, this true crime stuff. I sometimes a little bit reluctant to put myself in that frame, but this is an astonishing story. It will be a huge trial, and it will be, the responsibility will weigh fairly heavily or very heavily on the jurors in sifting through the evidence
and on the prosecution. I hasten to add, they've got a big responsibility to get this right. One of the best books I read on Australia is the late John Bryson's Evil Angels, about the Lindy Chamberlain. He was a real forerunner of that, I think, John Bryson, lovely fella, and a real forerunner of that coverage.
Yes, it's going to be a very interesting one. We'll keep you updated as we go. Meanwhile, Jack, Qantas, they had a shareholder revolt, huge votes, 83% of shareholders voting against executive pay, Jack. Just another tale of woe for the national carrier.
Yeah, well, it's just a continuation of the same tale of woe in a sense. Look, I just think it's good to see shareholders exercising their muscle. Too often, I think, these days in the corporate world, the executives and the board kind of run the place without any oversight, without anybody holding them to account. And it's good to see, and it's healthy to see, that shareholders, which include institutional shareholders, are prepared to say, no, we don't think you've got this right at all.
Well, I just add, Jack, I don't know if you know this, but Joe Aston, who was Qantas's tormentor through the Australian Financial Review in his Rear Window column, one of the sort of most read columns around the country, he has moved on. We're not quite sure what he's doing next in his career. But
he's probably enjoying flying Emirates first class wherever he wants to go.
He wouldn't be in the Qantas lounge, would he? I don't think he's welcome there. He's been replaced by Mark Di Stefano, Jack.
Yeah, who I don't know.
Mark, I do know, and I think he's a very good journalist. He ran afoul. He was working for the British media and got into a bit of strife when he basically, what do we say, in order to be cautious, he basically had the keys to get into a Zoom call from another news agency and sat and watched while they had their sort of online conference. And reported on. Got into a bit of strife there, got the flick from, I'm not sure who he was working with at the time, might have been BuzzFeed, but now he's back and he'll be writing at least partly that Rear Window column. So that'll be interesting. I don't know that he'll bring the same aplomb to it that Joe did, but Mark acknowledged that in his tweet recently. But look, he's a good replacement, actually. And he's a bloke who's proven to himself he's not above getting his hands a bit dirty for a story.
Yeah, well, farewell, Joe. He certainly brought a very individual style to the Rear Window column.
I remember
not always appreciated widely in the corporate world, I don't think, but it was always good fun.
I remember meeting him. He wasn't the columnist there at the time. Might have been, actually. But he was on the drum with me and someone else. And I was there basically to promote Unholy Trinity. So that's how long ago it was. So we're probably talking 2014, 2015. And we said during a break, I said, look, I want to talk about pedophilia. And Joe said, God, Jesus, I don't want to talk about that. Not his bailiwick, but or clerical pedophile. Oh, God, not Jesus. Thought he had a brief coronary sort of occlusion there, but look, he'll definitely be missed. It's rare to find these days a columnist who actually drives the sale of a newspaper, and certainly Joe did that. As Joe did that at the AFR, we wish him well. Where to for Qantas now in terms of their reputation, Jack? I just looked at some figures here. I just want people to understand they're holding over $500 million in ticket credits from COVID.
Yeah, they have to solve those problems. They have to reimburse people or get them to fly somewhere else or do something. They've got to clear their decks of those present problems, and then it's just a question of running the airline well. That's all they can do.
Maybe hire a few more Australians and stop outsourcing everything elsewhere. Yeah. It's very difficult to be an airline these days without trying to cut costs in the behind-the-scenes sort of stuff, whether it's baggage handling or maintenance of aircraft, that sort of thing. It's one area that Qantas and other commercial aviation companies always look to get as cheap as chips as wherever they can, and that's a good thing for shareholder value, but might not always be a great thing for safety.
Yeah, they're not the only airline around the world that are having their problems. Cathay Pacific, our home carrier here in Hong Kong, it's not in the same kind of problems, but very similar kind of problems.
Well, the chairman, it was basically just almost howled down during this shareholders meeting. He said the company decided, because it acknowledged that it had spent over $1 million in terms of, by way of support for the yes vote in the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum, Jack.
Yeah, his reputation it's quite damaged, I would think.
Should he have gone with the CEO? And people were saying that at the time.
He says no because they needed some continuity, and I accept that he's probably right about that. But the easiest thing for him would have been to go, and I think perhaps he is doing the right thing by hanging around because to his own cost, because the longer he's there, the worse his reputation will suffer.
Well, I just want to just have a look at... I didn't know that he was a director of Qantas. Todd Sampson, Jack.
Yeah, I thought you knew that. Yeah, the man from Gruit.
Yeah, he's an odd fellow, I'd have to say. Thinks he's the smartest person in the room. I guess sometimes he might be. But, he's just survived a push to oust him.
Yeah, he's got some odd friends too, Mr. Sampson.
I don't know. How would you get on a board meeting when a bloke walks in with a T-shirt with writing on it? Anyway, it's a funny old world, Jack. Qantas has a lot of work to do. Do you fly by them? I know you haven't been flying much, but I tend to choose them. That's my go. I've had some fairly dismal that comes with Virgin, and so I went from Qantas to Virgin, and then Virgin let me down, so I've gone back to Qantas. And to be honest, my own personal experience, not having been a huge flyer myself, but through the pandemic and outside of it, I haven't had too many problems with Qantas.
Well, I'm the Greta Thunberg of Hong Kong. I don't fly anywhere now. But when we first moved to Asia, we switched to the Asian airlines because they were better, and I think they still are. I think
that's right. I think Singapore Airlines are considered probably one of the best airlines in the world, along with the Emirates and the Qatar Airways and things like that, companies like that. Look, it's very good of you to sacrifice your travel in the interest of climate change, Jack. Well done, you.
Oh, yes, yeah, I'm so green. Yeah.
There you go. Redbridge poll out this week. Cos Samaras was all over Twitter explaining the great divide in Australia. I'm not entirely sure that I agree with him, but look, we'll just get on to the facts first. The published national poll for Redbridge has Labor at 53.5% two-party preferred. It went on with various analyses saying Labor is behind the LNP on primary vote in the outer suburbs. Labor has increased its support amongst university graduates. The LNP now significantly in front amongst voters with year 12 or less education levels. I think these things were also understood from last from the last federal election. LNP is marginally in front among those with a TAFE qualification. Labor in front amongst those earning less than $1,000 a week, they say, is mostly people on welfare. Green support amongst the 18 to 34s, the Gen Zers, Jack, now matches the LNP nationally. LNP's pathway to victory is still extremely narrow. We'll talk about that in a minute. Most of Labor's decline is occurring in the outer suburbs and within its safe seats. According to Cos, and he tweeted this up, not much fat left on some of those safe seats, especially in Melbourne. There's two ways of looking at that. And on two-party preferred Labor leads the LNP across all of the above, marginally because of the Greens. These trends, if they continue, will upend how many within Labor conduct themselves, how Labor will conduct themselves. No more safe seats will be a huge culture shock for some. Finally, the norm, this is from Redbridge, is for first-term federal governments to go backwards. Right now, that will result in minority government, 18 months to go, though. So there's a lot going on here, and we talked about Peter Dutton and his sort of odd remark last year that the Liberal Party was the party of regional Australia. I think you probably want to have those words again, but it seems to me that the Liberals are strategising towards winning what we might call a blue-collar vote or an outer suburban vote in Melbourne and Sydney. And when I look across the number of seats that they could potentially pick up, I just can't see how they can win. And then when and into that analysis, you've got to roll in the fact that they've basically coughed up the Teals seats. They've basically put the white flag out on those, haven't they?
Well, they're not going to get them back, I don't think, unless someone messes up. Any of those Teal people who do a
I actually
fair
think
job
they
will
were
stay there.
chances. I thought they were really good chances if they provided a good candidate in Kooyong. I thought they were a chance to pick up Kooyong again, but not now. I just
I didn't think they were at any stage a good chance of getting that. This is not a problem or not a situation that's peculiar to Australia. This has happened all around the Western world, where the progressive parties, whatever they're called, the Democrats, the Labor Party, or the Labor Party in Australia, have become more and more the party of what I call the credential class, the people who've been to university, professional people, all that sort of stuff. That's much more a Labor grouping now, or a progressive grouping now, than it's ever been. And at the same time, they've had trouble holding on to what I still think of as the blue-collar voters.
Right, yeah. It's probably,
and that's what's happening in Australia.
Probably a little bit of an anachronism these days, but
but
you might call it a tradie vote, something like that. But
however you describe them, we all know what we mean, I think. And the Democrats have struggled to hold on to them in the United States, and we'll be talking about that later. The Labor Party in Britain have struggled to hold on to them, and the Labor Party in Australia has struggled to hold on to them, and that's happening in Western Europe as well.
Yeah, it is.
It's a sort of a social difference, if you like.
We're at that sort of at very different stages in electoral cycles compared to the British Labor Party or politics in the UK, where the red wall was dismantled significantly in the last election. And now it looks, on the basis of by-elections and polling, it looks like that will be rebuilt. So I think these things are largely cyclical. But I think if the Liberal Party decides to put itself forward as most recently has claimed it's the party of small business and those sorts of things. But I struggle with the concept of them fighting elections in these outer suburban seats where they don't really have a profile, Jack. And I think while they might be able to pick up a few seats here and there, I just don't think it's sustainable in the long run.
I think the Liberal Party's chances of success at the next federal election are very low.
Yeah.
Whatever they do, that's going to be the case. Their only prospect of success if the wheels fall off the Labor Party at the next election.
Yeah.
What they need to be doing, and what Dutton's doing a pretty fair job of doing, I think, is just plodding away and making themselves as relevant as they can where they can and staying in the game. That's all they're going to do. All they can do is just try and stay on their feet.
I I do note, and perhaps I'm cynical, but I do note that Peter Dutton's gone very quiet on Gaza. And that would be, I would think, again, cynically, I suppose that is because for every sort of denunciation of Hamas and more broadly Palestine in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, he may not be finding himself winning a lot of votes in the outer suburbs, certainly in southwestern Sydney.
Oh, no, I think it's more practical than that, even. I think this is causing division within the Labor Party, and if your opponents are having trouble, keep quiet and let them have trouble.
Yeah, okay. I don't think it's trouble, though. I don't think it's trouble for people like Tony Burke or Chris Bowen. Why would it be?
No, I think there's a division in the Labor Party, and there will be a division in the Labor Party over this. There is in the Democrats in the United States, and there is in the Labor Party in Britain. And if I were Peter Dutton, I'd do exactly what he's doing. Keep quiet and let the battle run.
Well, he wasn't quiet initially, and he was sticking his bib in a fair bit, and I think he's decided to back away. It used to be, of course, that when it came to discussions on foreign affairs matters, it wasn't the subject of a lot of criticism, but of a lot of partisan politicking. But those days are well and truly behind us. Yeah, I've just noticed that he's gone a little bit quiet, and I think that's because... So I don't think Bowen et al. Have lots of problems in Western Sydney, because I think
I don't think that's Labor's
between
problem. Labor's problem is the division between what they're going to say and what the Prime Minister wants to say. That's the problem, and that's the problem all around the Western world. Again, it's pretty consistent.
Yeah, my question is, though, Jack, how can the Liberals get any sort of benefit from that? And I just can't see how they would do that. Any person, let's say, who's got an Arab background, supports Palestine, denounces Israel, they're not going to look to the Liberal Party for some sort of refuge, are they? Political refuge.
The advantage for any Conservative Party who stays out of this battle is that you get to watch the other side fight amongst themselves, and that's always a vote loser. You just sit back and say nothing, and you'll pick up some votes from people who don't like disunity and division.
All right, can't see it myself, but anyway, we'll move on. We've got a new program.
I think it was an American president who says, "Never get in the road of your opponents if they're having a proper disagreement."
I understand that, but I don't see voluble expressions of disagreement within the Labor Party, and I think the actions of Burke, etc., Burke, Bowen, Ed Husic, etc., are going through those sorts of issues, and basically what you'll see is anyone who might be a supporter of Palestinians and denounces Israel are not going to look at the Liberal Party and go, yeah, I think that's where I'll rest my vote. But I just can't see it.
I'll stick my neck out again. I think probably the Labor Party will squeak back at the next election with a majority on its own. Slightly worse result. They have to govern with the Teals, and the Liberal Party almost no chance.
Well, they didn't get 53.5 two-party preferred last time, Jack. So I'm not quite sure where Cos is going with his minority government stuff there. 53.5 would increase their majority, although it depends where those votes are going, of course. So we'll see. We're a long way away, and we'll see. But there is this divide emerging in our community along demographic lines, along income lines, along asset lines, along age group lines. And while Labor were the beneficiaries of that in the last federal election, it remains to be seen where the rest of it goes, where the rest of it happens. But these are big divides. The biggest divide, of course, Jack, is homeowners and those who rent. But that's another story for another time. NCIS Sydney. Oh, you beauty. Starts on Paramount Plus. I'm not a subscriber to that. I think just one streamer too many for me, Paramount Plus. And so we've got the franchise has moved into this country. Well, do you reckon they get Roger Rogerson? He'd be fantastic on the NCIS sort of stuff, wouldn't he?
I think he's busy. My wife and son are sort of fans of of these various franchises, the Bruckheimer lot, yes, and Law and Order and all that sort of stuff. I always think they're a bit odd, but they certainly seem to work.
Don't like them much. I'm not a big fan, but I am told that a lot of the prison populations enjoy the NCIS stuff because they go, oh, hang on. They learn a little bit more about forensics every time, but it does create this obsession around forensic science and crime fighting, and it often bemuses coppers to think that this is the way it works now, that there's this sort of heavy forensic analysis, and that anyone who wants to join the police does so on the basis that they'll effectively join NCIS. While we're talking about programs, and I know I'm a little bit late to this, listeners, but I just watched the first season of The Bear on Disney Plus, and as I say, very late to this. The second series is out, and I've just put my viewing on a little bit of a pause there while I basically take in what's happened in the first series. It is wonderful television, and I can't wait for number 2. If you haven't seen it, listeners, check it out, The Bear. Really just a wonderful piece of writing, casting, acting, production, just beautiful stuff. Based around the ongoings in a sandwich bar in Chicago, where the boy, most likely a prominent three-hat chef, returns because his brother has committed suicide. His brother had owned the restaurant and he takes it over. It's just a wonderful show, beautiful stuff. So that's highly recommended from me, but it's highly recommended from everybody. It's just a wonderful show. On to now, and probably the most important matter going on around the world, Gaza. I just wrote a column, Jack, that won't be up before the Australian, but I do want to read this, and it'll be news to you, and it's rather long, but I do want to do it. And there's been a number of sort of false equivalences, moral equivalences created around Hamas and the Ukrainian Defence Forces. People have tried to paint Hamas like Ukraine fighting the overwhelming forces, the David and Goliath battles. And you can look across media. I picked out a piece in Al Jazeera that was doing exactly the same thing. And it's really just awful stuff. And it was picked up by a Ukrainian journalist, perhaps the most famous Ukrainian journalist since the Russian invasion, who basically denounced this sort of moral equivalence. And I just want to read this to listeners. It's very powerful. I reposted it on my Twitter, but I do want to read it. He said, once upon a time, there was a city called Volnovakha. It's in Ukraine's Donbass, just halfway through Donetsk and Mariupol, a quiet place by the railroad of some 25,000 people. It's my hometown. And in late February 2022, the Russian military came from the north and the east. It semi-surrounded the city and began wiping it out street by street. They needed the city captured at any price, as soon as possible, for the sake of getting Mariupol isolated and besieged. For days, the people of Volnovakha were starving and thirsting in basement shelters. They couldn't leave them due to never-ending, relentless shelling 24/7. Some of them decided to test their luck and leave their shelters to possibly find a way out of hell. The ruined streets of Volnovakha were littered with the bodies of those who never made it. By March 1, the city was almost completely levelled. Also, there was this, Ukraine's 53rd Mechanised Brigade. And you know what they were doing during those days? Ukrainian soldiers and officers were fighting and dying to ensure an escape corridor of what used to be his hometown, so that civilians could flee into Ukrainian-controlled villages to the northwest with the help of volunteers and emergency response groups. I won't keep reading, but he cites other examples where the Ukrainian Defence Force put their lives on the line to save civilians. This is his point. Hamas does not do this. Hamas puts its civilians, the Palestinian people in Gaza, directly in harm's way. And they do that by putting command and control structures in underneath hospitals, underneath refuges. But that's the real difference. The Ukrainians go in and fight for their civilians. Hamas considers Palestinians to be expendable. I just finish with what he had to write, and I haven't even said who this is from. This is from Ilya Ponomarenko, who was considered by Der Spiegel to be the most important chronicler of events around the Russian invasion. He was reporting directly from the front lines in eastern Ukraine. And he finishes his tweet by saying this: "So, my dear bored Hamas apologists, go rotten hell with your imbecilic takes, trying to draw delusional comparisons between your beloved death cult terror group and Ukraine." Strong words, but they particularly resonated to me. And I'm really getting annoyed with those people who are comparing the circumstances in which the Ukrainians find themselves in with Hamas in Gaza.
Did you see the interview with the Hamas chap on the telly where he said he was asked that instead of building 500 kilometres of tunnels and command and control centres, etc., they could have built some shelters for the citizens? And he said, well, 75% of the people in Gaza are refugees. They're not our responsibility. They're the responsibility of the UN. And we need the tunnels for the war effort, sort of thing.
Yeah. I did see that, by the way. That was 7:30 report with 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson.
Hamas tells you what they are. They're very open about this.
It's just that people aren't listening.
Yeah. Hamas will tell you
what they are. So 75% of the Gazan population are considered expendable.
Yeah.
So, yes, I just thought those were very powerful words from a man who's been on the front line in eastern Ukraine reporting on it for a long time. Don't compare us to Hamas, please. And
so will there be a ceasefire?
I can't see it at the moment. Netanyahu's been very clear about this. Without the release of the hostages, there can be no ceasefire. We've got a ground war underway now, and I can't see that stopping. What's the chance of Hamas? Let's get back to what's real here. Why wouldn't Hamas release the hostages and thus spare more humanitarian losses in Gaza?
Well, I don't think Hamas wants a ceasefire.
They don't want it. They're winning a propaganda war. This is what this is all about. And I would say they're doing it very successfully.
Ceasefire to regroup and rearm and reset up, but they don't. They don't want peace.
No.
All you peace activists out there, you're just like most peace activists, you're really just on the other side.
Look, I don't want to be too critical of people who actively support a Palestinian homeland, a two-state solution. I don't want to be critical of people like that because the Palestinians have had a rough time of it, but at the same time, you've actually got to acknowledge that Hamas use Palestinians as bargaining chips. They're expendable. They can be killed, and in the furtherance of a propaganda war, that they're actually winning.
Yeah, the Hamas don't support a two-state solution, by the way.
No, they don't. Well, they don't support a two-state solution, no.
In fact, they want nothing to do with the two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. They want the Israeli Jews to be driven into the sea and probably the Israeli Arabs as well.
River to the sea.
Yeah, That's what they want. That's what the people around the world are chanting. Yes, I think Israel's probably losing some reputation, having some reputational damage. I don't think the people demonstrating in the streets are anything like a majority around the Western world. I think they're a noisy minority. And Israel has in the past and will be again prepared to take some reputational damage to do what they need to do. First role of every government is defend the realm. So they'll be making sure that Israel survives this. The second thing, which they're perfectly entitled to do, is to say what happened on October the 7th was an outrage, and we are perfectly within our rights to do what we can to make sure that doesn't happen again. And that's what they're doing now. And they're making a moral judgment about that. I think it's the right one, but some people will disagree.
Oh, look, and I just think in terms of objectives, that wiping out Hamas might be possible, but there's always going to be something that will fill the vacuum, and then that it may in fact be worse or as bad as. as a must going forward, and that really there needs to be a negotiated settlement. There've been a number of those over the journey, and both sides have breached those accords at various times. But that's the way forward. But really, where we are now is that Hamas led the incursion that started all of this. So they are the Russia, if you wanted to use that. If you want to use that strange moral equivalence, they are the Russia. They stormed into Israeli territory, massacred citizens and massacred civilians, and took away hundreds more as hostages. And in doing so, Jack, they would have understood that an overwhelming response was coming their way, and so that's when they started this propaganda war, and they've been doing it. Been doing it for a long time now. It's a very old tactic.
If you have a look at the people who know the situation best, that is the other countries in the region, they are pretty much in support of Israel getting rid of Hamas. That's what they want, because they think that's the only prospect for some kind of negotiated solution. First, get rid of Hamas. So that's the view of the Gulf Arabs. Saudis are being fairly quiet about it. Certainly the view of Egypt.
The Gulf states, Jack, are actually talking about reducing their output of oil in protest. Now, we'll see how far that goes, but they're doing that in protest to Israel's ground war in Gaza.
This is the chairman of the Defence Committee of the United Arab Emirates. We want everyone to acknowledge and accept that Israel is here to exist and that the roots of Jews and Christians are not in New York or Paris, but here in our region. They are part of our history and our culture. It is a direct argument against everything Hamas stands for. And that's the sort of view you find common in the Gulf Arab countries and in Egypt as well.
Yes, well, there's some talk about... So I gather the governments in the Emirates are not as one there, because there is some talk, although it hasn't happened yet, that they will reduce their oil production by way of protest. So we'll see about that. And that's a very interesting comment. That comes from, Jack, who was that? That was the head of their defence forces?
The chairman of the Defence Committee of the UAE.
Defence Committee, okay. Interesting, okay. Keir Starmer has come out and, well, look, before we get to Keir, can we just briefly touch on Scott Morrison, the bizarre appearance of Scott Morrison and Boris Johnson in Israel? Firstly, let's say that I think Scott would be seeking reimbursement for his costs in regard to that. So it's something that all Australian taxpayers have paid for. And the question that most people would be asking is, what's he doing there? What are they doing there?
My presumption was that the Israeli government probably paid for the trip.
Could be. But when I looked at who they were seeing, the Israeli government's probably looked through a long list of minor functionaries and decided to put them in touch with, I think, a former UN ambassador. Pretty low-level stuff, but and it might have been that why Peter Dutton went quiet, because any day that Scott Morrison's in the paper is a bad day for the Liberal Party, Jack.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing. But Keir Starmer, and of course, this triggered my memory because Scott Morrison made it clear that he was not a supporter of calls for a ceasefire, and Labor leader in the UK, Keir Starmer, is likewise. He said a ceasefire always freezes any conflict in the state where it currently lies, and as we speak, that would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October 7. Attacks that are still ongoing. Hostages who should be released still held. Hamas would be emboldened and start preparing for future violence immediately. And as we know, the Labor Party in the UK is a little bit divided, as you suggested before. A lot of progressive parties across the world are. And there was a significant backlash because the Labor Party's had its particular problems around Jeremy Corbyn and what we might call an anti-Zionist approach, Jack, if not anti-Semitic.
Yeah, the leader of the Burnley Council and 10 councillors resigned. There's been councillors resigning all over, the Labor councillors resigning all over the UK, mainly over this issue. Over
Starmer's remarks.
Yeah. And over the attitude of the leadership of the Labor Party not to call for a ceasefire.
No. There is a very good piece in Politico that I'd refer you to, and that's a member of the British Labor Party, a woman who's Jewish and who details her blues with Jeremy Corbyn over the journey. She said, I only really felt Jewish after taking Jeremy Corbyn on. And of course, Corbyn was expelled from the Labor Party for his inability, if not unwillingness, to reduce or to diminish or perhaps cut out the anti-Semitism that was rife in the Labor Party under his leadership.
Yeah, he didn't. He had no desire to do so. It was part of his brand.
Okay, so we've got Remembrance...
And it remains part of his brand.
We've got, in fact, they're just simply days away, Remembrance Day, 11th of the 11th, of course, at 11 o'clock. We will stand for a minute. And this is more or less a global commemoration, particularly in the UK. And during that time, a lot of pro-Hamas rallies are planned, Jack.
Yeah, well, Armistice Day, as it's called in the UK, is like their Anzac Day, really,
Sort of like
if you're Australian. They don't have an Anzac Day. Armistice Day is their big day to remember their fallen veterans. And this is going to cause a great deal of kerfuffle this weekend. They're very protective of things like the cenotaphs and all that sort of stuff around London and around the UK. And the protesters have been climbing up on top of those cenotaphs and painting them with pro-Palestinian slogans, etc., etc. So there will be some problems.
Yeah, well, there were some... The Met is got a whole welter of problems under its belt at the moment. They asked a coalition of organisers of these rallies to consider postponing any demonstrations over the armistice weekend, but the organisers declined to postpone any demonstrations. So these things go ahead, and as we've stated many times, people can get out and protest for whatever they feel like, as long as they are not engaging in violence, indeed violent rhetoric. They should be allowed to do so at any given time. But these things, this is really a little bit unpleasant given this is a day of national mourning for the UK and indeed around the world for all those who perished in World War One.
Yeah, it's Veterans Day in the US. Yeah, I absolutely agree. People have a right to protest. They even have a right to espouse stupid views.
Yeah.
And who knows, they might be, sometimes the people with the odd views end up being proven right. It's possible that some of the things the Greens protest about could be proven correct. Unlikely, but possible.
That's possible. But it's not really the point. Whether you're right or wrong is not the point.
No, you should be allowed to process, but I think the line needs to be firmly drawn at no inciting of violence, no damage to property, and pretty much other people should be allowed to get on with their business.
Well, we've talked about this, of course. You're a lawyer and you love your incitements and things like that. They're very difficult to prosecute. And I just think that if you're going to say these things, you would prevent violent rhetoric. That's the sort of thing that when there have been pro-Palestinian rallies in Australia, there was one in Hyde Park on the weekend, and I believe it was peaceful, and there was no violent rhetoric around. People were more than entitled to go and engage in this way. But it's where violent rhetoric arises and where violence kicks off that you've got a problem. All right.
The important thing to remember is that just because you're protesting, you don't own the space. You're there making a protest, but doesn't mean you have ownership of the space in which you're protesting.
Yeah, fair point. Okay. United States, Jack, over to the United States. Yes, we've all seen this. It was a Siena poll, a highly regarded poll, published in the New York Times, and it shows that Joe Biden is trailing Donald Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states by fairly big margins, average about 4%. I think in Nevada it's 10%. And this is indeed a bit of bad news for the Democrats.
It's even worse when you dig down into the polling. They also polled Biden against a generic Republican, that is, any Republican, not Trump.
Right.
And in that situation, he's trailing by 10 to 15 in all those states.
I just wonder about all of this and just how early it is. If we go back to 2016, around about this time, if we polled the Republican primary candidates, Trump had 1%.
Yep.
And then if we go to so we're talking 2016, so 2015, I should say, Trump was at 1% in the latter part of 20. And then we get to, with the 2020 presidential election coming in, and Trump led that by some considerable margin as the most likely presidential candidate to succeed in 2020, which of course didn't happen. And I just wonder if a lot of this is a little bit too early. Certainly what it's telling me is that Joe Biden is not popular, is not seen to be an adequate, is not seen to be the sort of person that a lot of Americans see as their president for the next 4 or 5 years.
No, it's certainly proving that. It's also showing that the support for Biden last time was a mile wide and an inch deep. It didn't go deep into the community. Some of the more extraordinary things in this polling is that Trump is getting 22% support amongst black voters, much the same amongst Hispanic voters. They are records for a Republican. No Republican candidate's ever gotten those kind of numbers before.
Early days.
And the other thing is that if you dig into the polling, what it's showing is that people think that they were better off when Trump was president, and they think that Biden has made them worse off. And the economy's, once you lose people on the economy, that's hard to come back from.
It is, yeah. It is, and I just see here in the analysis that Trump leads Biden in terms of economic management, 59-37. And those things, when we do get back to voting behaviour, the economy is the major driver. Cost of living, you can call it whatever you like.
They are sticky numbers, and they're hard to change.
Yeah, they are.
Certainly one of the things that's happened is that David Axelrod, who was Obama's kind of chief man, really, when he was in government, he seems to be busy trying to push Joe out the door. It's very late to change horses. A lot will happen in the next year that no one can predict. That's certainly true. And Biden's team says he's resolved to run his firm. In the end, he says only Joe Biden can make this decision. If he continues to run, he will be the nominee of the Democratic Party. What he needs to decide is whether that is wise, whether it's in his best interest or the country's. So when David Axelrod starts saying that, you've got some thinking to do.
Well, when we talk about second agenda policies, I'm not entirely sure what Biden would be promoting, but there were reports in the Washington Post during the week that Trump is basically, his policies are based on revenge. And they interviewed a number of people, including the former Attorney General, one of his appointments, who believes that he'll come after him. Former Chief of Staff, John Kelly, will go after him, that Trump will go after the Biden family. It's not much of a, what we might call second, although broken, term agenda. Revenge.
Yeah, look, I think you're probably right. What is apparent at the moment is, and it is a year out, it's almost exactly a year out as we're recording it, 364 days, I think, is that people are focused on the economics and they feel like they were better off under Trump, and they feel like Biden has made them worse off. And that's going to be hard to unravel. And the thing about Trump is that people know about him. They kind of knew about him in 2016. And this polling shows they don't really like Trump, what their life was like when Trump was the president.
Well, it's almost like a perception thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're in the middle of a pandemic and life wasn't all that kind, but that's just the way that reflection can be a bit deceptive. But there is, of course, real concern within the DNC, the Democratic Party base. 17% of its 300 employees have signed a letter to DNC leaders saying that, and I quote, "We feel it is the DNC's moral obligation to urge President Biden to publicly call for a ceasefire." We're going into the issues there that you've referred to, and what Biden can do as part of that sort of left progressive government and how they're struggling to deal with the sort of moral complexity of Israel and Gaza.
Yeah.
Shouldn't they be calling for judges to step aside and let Gavin Newsom have a crack?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this. If you're going to do it through the primaries, probably the decision needs to be taken in the next few weeks.
It does need to be done soon.
Yeah, so that Newsom can get on the ballot in all of those states he needs to win the primaries. The other alternative, I think, is to run this through to the Democratic convention and then have Joe develop a health issue, which shouldn't be too hard at his age, and to give it away and to let the convention determine that, say, a Newsom-Harris ticket or a Newsom-someone else ticket would be the best chance of winning.
Yeah. I think one thing that I would agree with in terms of the statements from, what's his name, Obama's former man. I'm just looking for his name here.
David Axelrod.
Axelrod, yeah, sorry. Axelrod, there are things that just completely unforeseeable. It really does promise to be the 2020 in American politics. It could go either way. It could end up in civil war, Jack.
Yes, of course it could. Well, I'm not sure they'll end up in civil war, but a year is a long time in politics.
There's going to be a lot of stuff. I'll walk you through a scenario. On Washington, D.C. 4-count indictment, that's March 3. I think that's a week before Super Tuesday. And it's not. It's a couple of weeks before Super Tuesday. But let's say Trump is convicted and jailed. What happens? I'm not expecting you to answer that because I don't think people know. I don't think how that's going to go, what the full implications of it all are. So there's just going to be, we can't ever look to any given year ahead and say this is what's going to happen and comfortably predict it. But this seems so chaotic and unpredictable that you just cannot say which way it's going to go. Certainly Trump has a significant pathway to do a Grover Cleveland, and that is to have a second non-consecutive term in the White House.
The other thing I think we can safely take away from these polls, even though they're early, is that Joe's not a great horse to be riding.
Well, it must be said too that when the Democrat primary was on in 2020, he was a long way back in the field there for a long time. And it was only South Carolina that got his campaign rolling. And the South Carolina primary, it's been brought forward. So I think the way the Democrats have got theirs structured is New Hampshire, Iowa, and then South Carolina.
Can I just quote you this from the co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund, a bloke called Cliff Albright. People fundamentally misunderstood what black voters said in 2020. The depth of support was never there. The enthusiasm was never there for Biden. We were very pragmatic. We knew he was the best chance to beat Trump, and that's why we supported him.
Yeah, that's right. So, 2020 was a profound anti-Trump election. It was a referendum on Trump, essentially. And despite what he claims, he lost it significantly. But that's not to say that people had embraced Joe Biden and would, therefore, just put him down for 2 terms. There was always a sense that Joe Biden's presidency was always going to be a 4-year filler with other candidates to come along. Yeah, that's how I always saw it, given his age at the time.
As I say, that the safe takeaway from this is, even this far out, Joe's not a great candidate.
All right. The Trump indictments, Jack. You reckon there's a federal offence which would seem to apply? And I've
been talking to a lot of Americans here. There are a lot of Americans in Hong Kong. I don't know that they're all Democrats, but you could fit the Republicans in Hong Kong into a couple of red and white Hong Kong taxis. Be squeezy, but you could fit them in there.
Right. A handful, Jack.
Yeah. So the Americans I've been talking to are Republican, so Democrats, or what the American pollsters would call Democrat-leaning. They all tell me that the reason why they don't like Trump at all is because of January 6th, and they think that what he did there was disgraceful and that he incited either a riot or insurrection. And so I had a look. I put my US lawyer's hat on temporarily. I had a look, and is there a charge that they could have brought against him for doing that? And there is. It's 18 US Code 2383. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. And I keep wondering, why is that charge not being brought against him?
Oh, I love your incitement charges, Jack, but they're very difficult to prosecute. You've actually got to draw a prosecutorial line between the person who is actually doing the urging or the inciting and the actions that followed. And that's a bit sketchy. What the Georgia business and what the DC 4-count indictments are doing is saying, here is a practice from President Trump that conspired to thwart the Electoral College process by creating a suite of false electors and so on and so forth. We haven't got it confirmed yet, but his last chief of staff, Meadows, it is likely that he has not flipped. It's a sort of crass term, but it's likely that he'll be given indemnity from prosecution and will give evidence against Trump in the DC matter. And that's chief of staff. That's pretty much every conversation Donald Trump had. And it's likely that he was... So Meadows was actually given indemnity in regard to evidence that he gave at the grand jury, which led to this 4-count indictment, and in conversations and in interviews with the special counsel, Jack Smith, Meadows has maintained that Trump was dishonest. Now, these are reading between the lines things, that Trump dishonestly went on the record as saying that he won the election and then sought this conspiracy going forward. Again, we just don't know where it's going to end. We don't know where to go too far down the track here. But let's say he goes down on that 4-count indictment. The first question I would ask is, where are you going to put him? Where are you going to jail? What jail are you going to put him in? There's just so much that we don't know and cannot know about all this process going forward.
Yep, I agree.
All right, moving on. I want to touch on New Zealand, Jack. They're settling in with their new Conservative government. There's some sort of very odd stuff going on, not so much from Christopher Luxon's National Party government, but some of the fringe players, Jack, are seeking to invoke a discussion on or referendum, not a discussion, but a national discussion, followed by a referendum on the Treaty of Waikato. Waikato? Yeah.
I'm not even sure he's been sworn in. You know how in Australia you lose an election and normally by the Monday morning the new Prime Ministers are there with the Governor-General signing the documents, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But it works very slowly in New Zealand because of their complicated electoral system. So I think the swearing in is yet to take place.
Oh, interesting. And of course, Winston Peters was completely blown away at the last election. His New Zealand First Party had, I think, around a dozen or more members in the beehive. They were all wiped out, but he's back again, and he's likely to be a bit of a kingmaker, isn't he?
He is.
Again?
The difficulty in New Zealand is that the incoming Prime Minister is going to need support from two different parties who can't stand each other.
Well, that's what happened because Peters ended up being New Zealand's foreign minister for a period of time. He looks like being the kingmaker. I did understand that it was the Nationals, despite Labor being absolutely spanked in the election, that the Nationals would not be able to form a government in their own right. But perhaps we just ignore New Zealand, or I do, or I have, because I didn't realise they hadn't sworn in the PM yet.
As far as I'm aware,
you're not sure. You're not sure, but it's not. It certainly hasn't been a rapid process.
Yeah, the other party, there's the Winston Peters, New Zealand First, and the ACT Party. The leaders David Seymour, and Peters and Seymour certainly don't see eye to eye. Don't like being in the same room. And disagree on almost everything. So that's going to be a tricky thing for the Prime Minister to negotiate his way through.
All right. Well, we've got a discussion here too on immigration, refugees, and Europe, Jack, with the Green leading German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying the German government plans to deport on a grand scale, Jack.
Yes, and because we've been a bit slow getting through it, this is happening not just in Germany, but in the Nordic states as well.
Yes.
That the Nordic state relevant ministers have just signed an agreement to do this as a joint process. That is to jointly charter planes, people to deport people, all that sort of stuff.
Yes. The sheer number of German refugees, you and I have argued about this, but on numerous occasions, but the Germans took on an enormous number of refugees coming from the Syrian civil war.
2 weeks ago, you were having a shot at me because I said it might be a problem. You said, no, it's great.
Thanks for paraphrasing, Jack. What I said was you were expecting the sky to fall in and it didn't. So
speaking of paraphrasing.
Yeah, no, my memory is very clear on this. So, but that view within the Germans and within the Nordic states, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland to a lesser degree, are now saying that there are some sort of issues around social cohesion. It's just political, isn't it really? Because they're seeing the rise, in Germany at least, they're seeing the rise of the ADF, which is basically a Nazi party, getting around about 20% of the vote. So this is a response to what is perceived to be a social sort of crisis within those countries.
It varies. It's not uniform in its application across those countries. They all have problems of social cohesion, of people not integrating into society. But in Sweden, for instance, their problems are probably the worst because there's a crime problem attached and a violent crime problem attached with people throwing hand grenades into buildings, into houses, etc., etc. And that's partly to do with the lack of integration of the migrants and partly to do with a sort of a gang warfare amongst some migrant crime families. In Germany, much more widespread problems, everything from they closed swimming pools in the summer because they were having too many problems, too many disputes between young migrant men and the young German men over the behaviour of the young migrant men around the girls in the swimming pool. So it's universal across there, but they're now calling just to deport people. That's pretty mainstream political view.
How do you deport people to Syria, Jack?
Sorry?
How do you deport people to Syria?
Well, the first thing is not very many of them were from Syria during that situation.
But how do you deport people into war-torn countries?
Yeah, well, I think it is difficult. Personally, I think there's a proper way of going about this. I don't think you do deport people without proper processing. I think you need to put people if they're asylum seekers, they need to have those asylum seeker claims dealt with fairly and transparently and properly.
And quickly.
And then if the people who miss that, then you have to find a way to send them back to deport them. But I don't think I think people are proposing that people are deported because they have views that the majority of people don't like. And I don't think you should ever deport people for having unfashionable views. The real solution to the problem they've got is to find a way to integrate the migrant populations into the wider community. And that takes work and time.
But these are things that have been ignored in Europe for a long time. The sorts of things that Australia gets right about immigration, and particularly
the Anglo countries get right. I'll be more specific than that. Canada, the United States, Australia and New Zealand all get this right. And almost no one else does. The Northern Europeans have no idea.
That's because the Europeans say, "Well, welcome to our country. You go and live over there, and we'll check in." Well, we won't check in on you.
Yeah. So that's why in 2005, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Nicolas Sarkozy, the President of France, all said that multiculturalism was a failure, and it was a failure. They were right, because multiculturalism as practiced in Northern Europe is a failure, because they don't understand the basic principle is that you've got to find a way to make these people German or French.
Have a sense of belonging.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's worked really well in Australia. And the way that works, you've got to have enough confidence in your own culture to make this work. So what's happened in Australia? Greek Australians, Italian Australians, they've kept so much of their culture that they really value, but basically fit within what's now an expanded version of an Australian culture. And the same thing happens in the United States, it happens in Canada, it happens in New Zealand. The Northern European countries are going to have to learn how to do this.
There's been a really interesting show on SBS, Jack, and I'm just looking for the name of it. It basically follows the arrival of refugees into a country town in Victoria and how they get on and how this country town, so this particular country town, I'm just trying to think of it, it's where the old man used to Maryborough in central Victoria. And
the birthplace of John Nichols. I'm sure there's a plaque there somewhere.
Where the old man taught at the tech school there. And it's actually a rather wonderful show. It focuses on a number of families that have arrived there. And in one case is a North African refugee boy who's been given a rent-free stay in someone's caravan in their home, and he opens a bowling for the local side. He bowls pretty quick too. He's taken a few wickets. But it's a lovely sort of tale about some of the difficulties that arise for people. There are some, not you wouldn't call them, they're just cultural imbalances or differences. They're not necessarily points of conflict. But overall, a fairly successful exercise. There are people from South America, there are people from North Africa, as I say, there are people from the Arab world running their way and establishing their own identities and retaining their culture while embracing another one. In central Victoria. It's a really important lesson. It's a really good show, and I wish I could find the name of it, but I'm really taken by it. And it just shows that, firstly, that all those people feel that Australia is their home, and they are very grateful to the to Australia, to the Australian government to give them this second chance at life. It's also trying to delve into just how significant it must be. Our ancestors, 100 years or more ago, came to this country, and just what a significant move that is. Just it's an enormous risk enterprise or exercise, and it's only really for the bold who do it. And there are problems along the way. But overall, this is a pretty good exercise. They say we could either really succeed here or we could really bugger things up.
Yeah, and not everyone's going to make it. A lot of people from all those successful migrant countries, even, a lot of people go back.
It's called Meet the Neighbours, by the way. Sorry, Jack. Keep going.
Yeah, who decide that it doesn't suit them, so they return to it from where they came. But it can be made to work. And you're right, they will always see themselves as Aussies. You fly into JFK Airport in New York, and you jump in your yellow taxi, and your Bangladeshi taxi driver might have been there for 6 months, but he's an American.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Right? That's the difference. That's what Northern Europe doesn't get, and what they need to get. This is doable. They just got to approach it the right way.
I do remember.
And forget about the deportations and all that sort of stuff. You've got to make it work.
Yeah, good show. Meet the Neighbours. Check it out. Look, there are some other major shifts in people movement around the world, and the one that's probably got very little reporting on it, Jack, because I guess we're all looking at Gaza and elsewhere, is that Pakistan has begun deporting people all over the place and directly into Afghanistan, into harm's way with the Taliban there. 200 people have already returned voluntarily, and there's a much bigger number that has been basically pushed across the border, excuse me.
About 2 million, I think, is their intention to push back into Afghanistan.
They'll just be basically put in buses and trucks and wheeled over the border into very uncertain futures under the Taliban, Jack.
Yeah.
Awful story there.
And
in
the
Iran,
Iranians are doing something the same from the other end of Afghanistan. They are returning people to Afghanistan as well in similar sort of numbers.
yes, it's whichever way you look at it, that's not going to end well, is it? For those people, they're going to be in all sorts of strife. All righty, well,
Ukraine. We're getting towards the end of the...
we do need an update. We haven't been touching on Ukraine nearly enough. Yeah, but go on, Jack.
The question is, have they left it too late? Have they done anything with this summer?
Saw some footage during the week of what seemed to be a very significant raid, well, basically an artillery raid on Russian positions. But we have to say overall, there've been some possession. They've repossessed Ukrainian territory in fairly small amounts, and I tend to think that sort of the idea of a quagmire, which is starting to find some sort of acceptance throughout Europe and the United States, really just suits Putin. But I think we also have to remember, and in February 2022, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, virtually every commentator around at the time was saying, well, this will all be over in weeks. And it just hasn't happened. And that it hasn't happened, obviously, because of the support of NATO and the US for Ukraine, but it also comes down to the bravery of the Ukrainian people and their defence force. My view on this is very clear. We stick with these people for as long as it takes. And like Hamas and their incursion into Israel, these things can never be rewarded. The Russian invasion of Ukraine can never be rewarded with territory, they attack civilians. We saw it with our own eyes. We saw the bombing runs. We saw the missiles striking on civilian populations in Mariupol and in Kyiv. And it's never to be endorsed or supported by way of negotiated settlement. Everything has to go back to pre-February borders, and then we can have a discussion.
Do you think that the support from NATO, as we've not made significant progress before the rains come this year, do you think the support from NATO and the other European countries will hold?
Well, the commentary around that, Jack, is that the focus now on Israel and Gaza is going to diminish support for Ukraine, and that may well be the way it goes. Just refer to what I said before. That's the way it should be. Russia behind its February 2022 borders, and then we can negotiate a settlement, but not before that. But yes, people's minds change. They get lazy. They get forgetful. They hope no one's looking. And it may well be that Ukraine does suffer from the change of focus to the Middle East.
Yeah, there certainly is some indication that could be happening. Was it the Italian Prime Minister who was caught on a sort of a sting phone call, saying that people are getting a bit tired of it? Giorgia Meloni, her name is.
Yeah, that's right. No, she had a bit of a gotcha moment. What needs to happen, and people may not like it, but what needs to happen is Ukraine have air superiority and all the support on the ground that they need, and that's how you end this. They have to be the Russians have to be pushed behind their 2022 borders.
Yeah. But I found it. I see there was a lot of fatigue. I have to say the truth from all the sides. We are near the moment in which everybody understands that we need a way out. So it's going to take a bit of shoring up of the European support.
Again, no, I don't think Biden's done much wrong in the Ukraine, but I don't know whether he has the energy to bring the NATO leaders together. One thing that actually has been very positive about this is that NATO is bigger and bolder and badder than it used to be as a force. And speaking in one voice, and support for Ukraine has come. I think it'll be the greatest mistake that NATO and the US could make if they top off the Ukraine. Okay, now we move into sport, Jack. And of course, the big news overnight was the magnificent innings of Glenn Maxwell. 201 not out, I think. The first Australian to make a double century in an ODI. The first double century in a side chasing in ODI history. And he came to the crease, Jack, when Australia was 7 for 90-odd. Well, he didn't come to the crease then, but in Australia we're 7 for 94 when Cummins came to the crease. And they put on, I think, 202. And I think Cummins got about 20 of them.
12, I think.
Yeah, there were a few buys because there was a difference of about 28. So he only got the 12. But he was a very calming influence on Maxwell. Maxwell got dropped a couple of times. The blokes who put him down will be feeling sick and sorry today. And it was I've only seen the highlights back. I actually fell asleep when they were 7 for and missed all the fun. But it was just an astonishing effort. And one of the great photos of this is Maxwell walking up the race, the long staircase up the race at the Mumbai ground, and the Indians just in love with him, taking photos and saluting him and all that sort of stuff. Well, I'm happy. It's the greatest ODI innings of all time.
Well, he's married. He's married into the Indian.
He loves India, like a lot of the Australian players do. They're not frightened of being in India anymore, or worry about cultural differences and carry around suitcases full of baked beans with them. Although they all, to a man, seem to just get on the buttered chicken, and that's about it. But yeah, just a fantastic knock. It assures Australia will play in the semis now, and just extraordinary stuff. Well done, Glenn Maxwell.
Yeah, I always thought they should have stuck with him much, much longer at Test cricket. Yeah.
Look, his spin bowling is as good as anyone. Zampa's been part of this great trajectory into the finals. He's been very good. But they decided not to go with a second spinner when Agar found himself injured and was replaced by Marnus Labuschagne. And so they decided we're going to go through part-timers. Travis Head's had a bowl. Glenn Maxwell's been very good with the ball. Saw him bowling the second last over. He wasn't happy about bowling. He apparently had a bit of a shout at the stump mics, according to the commentators. So Glenn Maxwell bowled, I think, the second or third last over. Copped a little bit of stick, but wasn't terribly pleased about having a bowl that late. And normally you wouldn't expect him. He should be bowling in middle overs and sometimes even earlier in the first 15. But hats off to that man for what was a wonderful knock. But elsewhere in the tournament,
Did you see the timed out?
Yes, I was just going to say. Now, I looked at the rule yesterday, and we're referring now to Sri Lanka player Matthews. Good player too, been around for a long time. He got to the crease and then was fiddling around with the strap. There was what we might call an equipment malfunction, and the strap on his helmet, and was fiddling around with it when the Bangladesh skipper Shakib went and asked the question of the umpire. And according to the rules, and those rules need to be changed, there was a period of 2 minutes grace given, and then if there is no response, then the batsman is given out. And that's what happened with Matthews. Now, what a timed out this rule is essentially about is for someone who hasn't come to the playing surface or indeed to the crease after 2 minutes. And so, but the umpires have no discretion the way the rules are.
I saw the interview with the fourth umpire, and he said that the ICC laws of cricket don't apply. It's the World Cup rules apply, and they have a protocol to follow. And what happens is that the TV umpire, the fellow up in the box, who's not the fourth umpire, that's the third umpire is up in the box, he sets the timer. And if the batsman doesn't get to the crease and be ready to go before the 2 minutes is up, he notifies the umpires on the ground, and that's when they don't have any discretion. And in their view, the 2 minutes was up before the equipment malfunction took place.
Look, if Matthews had his time over again, he would have put the bat down and faced the ball and then said, "Look, I need to fix this up." And the break thereafter could have gone on for 12 minutes.
He was facing a fairly gentle left-arm spinner. Even with a dodgy helmet, you reckon you could pat it back?
He didn't know Shakib was going to appeal. The idea behind it timed out, and there was a way to getting out that is in the ICC rules, and I understand that we're also operating under the tournament rules as well, but that is that you don't basically make your way onto the field for a couple of minutes. it's a very odd way of getting out. And statistically, Jack, you don't obviously face a ball. It's like the old diamond duck. You haven't faced a ball and you're out.
This is the first time it's ever happened in international cricket, I believe. But this is not... I've got no problem with the Bangladeshi captain. He's a very prickly and competitive little fella. But that's the way he wants to play. That's the way he wants to play. You don't complain about it. Complain about the rule.
Yeah, well, look, I thought it was a bit rough. And if he had his time over again, he would have... probably should have rethought it. Look, Matthews...
well, no, I guarantee you he doesn't think that at all. I saw the interview with him.
Well, he should, but he didn't, but and wouldn't. But Matthews could have banged on 30 or 40 pretty quickly and made that game a lot closer. So it really did have an impact on the result. And, yeah, I thought it was a bit much, and I think most people do. It wasn't Johnny Bairstow stumping, put it that way. Sure, he should have put the bat down and faced the ball, and then he could have taken up 20 minutes getting his helmet ready.
The Bangladeshi captain, it's in the laws. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I had to take a decision to make sure that my team wins. And whatever I had to do, I have to do it.
At least he says, I wanted my team to win. And often they dither around why they did it, but at least he's come out and said, yeah, I did it. Okay, I can wear that, yeah. Racing, Jack, how'd you get on the Melbourne Cup yesterday? We had a little win.
I stuck with Gold Trip, and he got the stitch. Yeah. And I got 2 out of the 3 in a very large effect. I didn't have the rank outsider who finished third.
Yeah, we didn't either. We had 2 legs in the trifecta, and there were 2 legs. In fact, the horses that I tipped our listeners last week, I think one was scratched. And 2 of those, well, one won it and one finished, I think, third. So we weren't far away, but unfortunately TAB doesn't pay on I got 1 leg, I got 1.5 legs. You've got to get them all. So no dice.
So there's no. It's a bit like the Johnny Bairstow thing. There's no payout on the spirit of racing.
That's right. So, yes, look, I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Western Sydney. He said, the Melbourne Cup, you almost can't tell people that you're going to a lunch to watch the Melbourne Cup these days. This sort of saying up to the cup thing has become more pervasive.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Well, as I understand the Greens' position in New South Wales, Jack, they say nup to the cup on the basis of cruelty to animals, but they are advocating for the Brumbies in the high country to be shot from helicopters.
Yeah.
Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Yeah. I think there's an underlying sentiment, not just to do with cruelty to animals, is that there's a good part of Australian society, and this has always been the case, who don't like to see people having fun.
Yeah, true enough. Look,
wowzers, we used to call
We will talk about the Brumbies next week, just because there are some particular issues around there, and people see it whenever it's announced that animals are going to be shot from helicopters. You're going to get some reaction from people who think that's a bit over the top. But this is a significant problem in that most of these horses, they're not DNA connected to Banjo Patterson or anything like that. A lot of these are dumped horses that have been dumped in the last 4 or 5 years, and they do cause, sadly, a lot of environmental harm in the Kosciuszkos and the Snowies, and really that we've got to the point now where there are so many of them that they actually do need to be culled. Difficult one, but we'll talk about that next week, Jack. So take us out. We've had a long show and we've gone all the way around the world, so take us out with something amusing, Jack.
Stephen Fry, the fellow, the British actor and writer and comedian.
Yeah, I think that's at least part of his resume.
Sorry?
I think that's at least part of his resume.
Yep.
He's also chairman of the ICC, Jack, the International...
the MCC.
MCC, that's right, yes.
Yeah, he's chairman of the Melbourne Cricket Club at the moment. It tends to be a relatively shortly held position. He was asking someone else for advice when he took it on, and they told him he'd whack on about 10 kilos while he was doing it, which for Stephen Fry is a bit more. I believe there's a lot of lunching involved. He's written, I think, 2 memoirs, and at least one of those he goes into fairly great detail about a cocaine habit that he had for many years. And in his last little bit of memoir, he's decided that the reason why he had a cocaine habit was that he had a similar affection for sweets, for lollies and candy or whatever you want to call them, when he was a child. And I thought that's the best excuse for a coke habit I've ever read.
I guess what he's saying, Jack, is that his impulse control was not all that strong, and he found that out when he was whipping into a couple of crunchies. And then when someone chopped up in front of him, he said, I have no impulse control to stop this. So.
Your Honour, if they hadn't have fed me so many Easter eggs, I wouldn't have been doing lies in the Groucho Club. You know? It's good defence, isn't it? Yeah.
We've all had our problems. And we've got John Cleese gets a mention here as well, Jack.
Yes.
He wasn't on the Charlie, was it?
No, I don't think so. He was on John Cleese has got a show on GB News in the UK at the moment. John always needs the money. I think he gets divorced every couple of years.
No, he hasn't been divorced for a long time. But his last divorce, which was over 10 years ago, I remember him whining on Twitter on a fairly regular basis that he did get taken to the cleaners. He lives on the island of Nevis, Jack, most of the time. And he declared the Nevisians to be the most generous people on earth, with apologies to the Canadians and Australians.
Yeah, well, he's back in London doing a show on GB News. GB News is a bit hard to describe. It's a bit like Sky Oz, but
a little bit like that, yeah. It's an attempt by, it's not a News Corp thing, but one of the former Sky News executives is running around.
Angelo, I can't think of his surname. Yeah.
Yes.
Frangopoulos.
Yes, that's right. Angelos Frangopoulos. Not my cup of tea when I was involved at Sky News, but he's moved on from there. He was working in the Emirates for a while. Now he's doing GB News, so it is a bit of, it's old man telly. Let's just get it out there.
Yeah, Andrew Neil was I think both the chairman and had a program on the thing which lasted 5 days, and he left.
So Stephen was on Cleese's program, and then he said, when I was a teenager, I had this vast empty hole in me that said, feed me, I need this sugar, I need it. Yeah, there's an impulse control problem there, but when it wasn't sugar, it became tobacco. So this is a story of my life, Jackie. So I smoked, and then in my 20s it became cocaine. Well, I will say nothing about that, but yeah, still on the durries. One of his other things was toast, that he became an aficionado of toast. So, but he doesn't blame that. He doesn't blame his compulsion to eat toast on his subsequent drug and alcohol problems, Jack. All right, well, that takes us out. We've gone over time again. How disgraceful. How disgraceful of you, Jack, to allow this to run over time. But we hope...
The answer to that question is always very disgraceful.
I hope we've been able to entertain and inform our listeners as per usual. Don't forget, listeners, drop us a line if you've got any comments, criticisms, questions, etc. And you can get hold of me on @JackTheInsider. My DMs are always open. And you get hold of Hong Kong Jack on his Substack,
who is growing old disgracefully on hongkongjack.substack.com.
Oh, we're all doing that, Jack. You're not on your own there. And I had a bit of a disgraceful episode yesterday, to be honest, but that's all part of the fun. And yes, so we'll leave you at the end of episode 51 with just a reminder to tune in next week with episode 52, and we'll look at all matters around the world and all matters politics and media in Australia. And thank you for listening. We'll see you later.